The rifle cracked. A single shot echoed through the dusty streets of Deadwood. Smoke rose from the barrel. A man fell. No one moved. No one said a word. Let's go back to the day it all began. The door to the Cavendish ranch splintered under the weight of Silas Blackwood's boot. He stood there, flanked by his two most ruthless men, pistols drawn. Arabella Cavendish tried to shield her children with her body, but it was no use. "That paper isn't real!" she screamed, her voice raw with desperation. Silas laughed, a cold sound that cut through the morning air. "The paper says it's real, and my men say it's real, so it's real." He grabbed her by the arm, his grip like iron. Arabella cried out as her husband's wedding ring caught on his rough glove and snapped, falling to the wooden floor with a tiny clatter. Her children, Thomas and Eleanor, huddled together in the corner, tears streaming down their faces. Thomas, at just 10 years old, clutched a small Bible to his chest, the only thing his father had left him before passing. "Please," Arabella begged, "this land has been in my family for 3 generations." "Times change, widow," Silas sneered. "Edmund Ashworth owns it now. He paid good money for the papers." From the doorway, Nathaniel Thorne, Deadwood's own land registrar, stepped forward, holding a document. "This deed is legal and binding," he said, though his eyes wouldn't meet Arabella's gaze. Edmund Ashworth stood just outside, watching from his fancy horse, a smirk on his face. He'd wanted this land for years, and now, through Silas's intimidation and Nathaniel's corruption, it was his. Arabella's knees buckled. Silas dragged her toward the door, away from her home, away from everything she'd known. As she was pulled away, her hand brushed against the Bible Thomas was holding. Her fingers closed around it for just a moment. Then it was gone. "Get out," Silas commanded, shoving her toward the dusty road. "You have until sundown to clear out whatever you can carry." As Arabella stumbled outside, she saw him. A man on a dark brown horse, watching from a distance. He wore a light beige cowboy hat and a bright red bandana around his neck. His eyes were hidden in shadow, but his gaze was fixed on Silas. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched. And that was when everything changed. The stranger watched as Silas Blackwood forced Arabella Cavendish toward the waiting wagon. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes held a fire that spoke of desperation. From his vantage point, he could see the fear in her children's faces as they clung to each other in the doorway of their home. The document Silas waved around wasn't just paper. It was the Cavendish family's entire future. For 3 generations, the Cavendish ranch had been more than just land. It was their legacy. Arabella's grandfather had homesteaded this barren stretch of frontier, turning it into a thriving cattle operation. Her father had expanded it, adding irrigation and building the large ranch house where Arabella had grown up and raised her own children. The deed in Silas's pocket proved ownership of over 500 acres, prime grazing land with a natural spring, a small but reliable creek, and enough timber to last a lifetime. Without it, Arabella and her children would have nothing, no home, no income, no future. Edmund Ashworth stood nearby, his expensive clothes and polished boots a stark contrast to the dusty street. He'd been trying to acquire this land for years. The Cavendish ranch bordered his own massive spread, and with it he could finally control the entire valley. His cattle would have unlimited grazing, and his profits would double. The document Silas held was worth a fortune to him, and worth nothing to Arabella. Nathaniel Thorne, the land registrar, adjusted his spectacles as he watched the scene unfold. His reputation for honesty was well known throughout Deadwood, but few knew the truth. For a substantial payment, he'd altered dates and signatures on documents before. This time, he'd helped create a fake deed that would make Silas's theft appear legal. The stranger's gaze shifted from the scene to the horizon. He'd seen injustices like this before, powerful men taking what wasn't theirs while the law turned a blind eye. But there was something different about this. Arabella hadn't just lost her land. She'd lost everything her family had built over generations. Her children's future had been stolen before their very eyes, and the stranger knew with certainty that unless that real deed surfaced within days, the Cavendish family would be lost forever. He'd seen families broken by such thefts before, forced into work camps, separated, scattered to the wind. The document wasn't just paper, it was survival. Subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The stranger watched as Silas Blackwood's men loaded Arabella's few belongings into a battered wagon. She stood beside Thomas and Eleanor, her shoulders slumped, her face streaked with dust and tears. The family Bible that Thomas clutched to his chest was the only thing that looked cared for in their meager possessions. The stranger waited until Silas and his men rode away, their laughter echoing down the street. Only then did he dismount, his boots making soft sounds on the wooden walkway. He approached slowly, giving Arabella time to notice him. Arabella tensed when she saw the red bandana around his neck. She'd heard stories about men who wore such things, dangerous men who brought more trouble than solutions. "Ma'am," the stranger said, his voice low and steady. "Are you all right?" Arabella straightened, trying to appear stronger than she felt. "I'll manage. We always do." The stranger nodded, his gaze shifting to the children. Thomas had his nose buried in the Bible, while Eleanor clung to her mother's skirt, her thumb in her mouth. "Your husband was a good man," the stranger said unexpectedly. "I knew him, Thomas too, when he was just a boy." Arabella's eyes widened slightly. "You knew my husband?" "I worked for him one summer, helped with the cattle drive north." The stranger paused. "He spoke of you often, said you had more grit than anyone he'd ever known." A flicker of recognition crossed Arabella's face. "You were the one who helped with the branding that year, the one with the scar on your hand." The stranger nodded slowly. "That was me." There was a moment of silence between them. The sounds of Deadwood continued around them, horses neighing, distant laughter, the clatter of a wagon passing by. "You didn't come here to reminisce," Arabella said finally, her voice regaining some of its earlier strength. "No," the stranger admitted. "I came about the paper, the deed." Arabella's shoulders slumped again. "It's gone. They took it when they dragged me from the house." "Where did you last see it?" the stranger asked, his eyes meeting hers. Arabella looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned. "The real deed? I don't know. It was always in the safe. Papa kept it there. But when Silas's men came, everything was chaos." She looked at Thomas, who was still clutching the Bible. "Thomas, did you see anything? Did you take anything from the safe?" The boy looked up from his book, his eyes wide. I took this. Papa told me never to leave without it. He said it was important." Arabella's face paled. "The Bible? That's all you took?" Thomas nodded, looking frightened. "Was I supposed to take something else?" The stranger stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the Bible in Thomas's hands. "May I see it?" Thomas looked to his mother for permission. Arabella nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. The stranger took the Bible carefully, his fingers brushing against the worn leather cover. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the pages. The family records were written in the front, births, deaths, marriages, but nothing about land deeds. The stranger continued flipping through the pages, his movements deliberate. He paused when he reached the back of the book, where the binding seemed slightly thicker in one spot. He ran his fingers along the seam, then carefully worked his thumbnail into the crease. With a soft tearing sound, a folded piece of paper slid out from between the pages. Arabella gasped. "That's it! That's the deed!" The stranger unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the document. It was old, the edges worn, but the signature was clear. Arabella's grandfather, establishing the original claim to the land. "They didn't find it," the stranger said, a hint of surprise in his voice. "They took everything else, but they missed this." Arabella reached for the deed, her hand trembling. How did it get there?" "I don't know," the stranger said, handing her the document. "But it's yours now." Arabella clutched the deed to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. "What do I do now? Silas Blackwood doesn't give up easily." The stranger looked toward the edge of town, where Silas and his men had disappeared. "That remains to be seen." He turned to leave, but Arabella stopped him. "Wait, who are you? Why would you help us?" The stranger paused, his back to her. "I'm a man who believes in justice, that's all." And with that, he walked back to his horse, leaving Arabella standing alone with the deed in her hand, her children watching her with hope in their eyes for the first time in days. Keep watching, because what this man does next is something you won't see coming. The stranger mounted his horse and rode toward Deadwood's land registry office. The deed was safe in his saddlebag, but he needed answers. Who had helped Silas steal the Cavendish ranch? Why had they targeted Arabella's family specifically? He dismounted outside the registry, a plain two-story building with a faded sign. Inside, desks were cluttered with documents and ink bottles. A clerk looked up as the stranger entered. "I need to see Nathaniel Thorne," the stranger said, his voice low. The clerk shifted nervously. "He's busy with a transaction. Come back tomorrow." The stranger didn't move. "This can't wait. It's about the Cavendish deed." The clerk paled. "I can't—" The stranger took a step forward, his hand resting near his pistol. "You can. Where is he?" The clerk pointed toward a back room. "In his office, but he doesn't like being disturbed." The stranger nodded and walked toward the office door. He could hear voices inside, Nathaniel's and another man's. "And make sure the original never surfaces," Nathaniel was saying. "Ashworth paid good money for this land. We can't have complications." The stranger pushed the door open. Nathaniel Thorne jumped to his feet, his face turning pale. Standing beside him was Edmund Ashworth, his expression unreadable. "What's the meaning of this intrusion?" Nathaniel demanded, though his voice trembled. The stranger ignored him, his gaze fixed on Ashworth. "You wanted the Cavendish land badly enough to steal it." Ashworth smiled, a cold, calculated expression. "The land was legally acquired, through proper channels." "Channels you paid for," the stranger said, stepping closer. "Channels involved forgery and intimidation." Nathaniel reached for a drawer, but the stranger's hand moved faster. His pistol was out, pointed at the registrar's chest. "Don't," the stranger said. "I just want answers. Who else is involved?" Before Nathaniel could speak, the window shattered. Gunfire erupted from outside. The stranger ducked behind the desk as bullets tore through the room. "Get out!" he yelled, firing back toward the window. Ashworth scrambled toward the back door while the stranger provided cover. Nathaniel hesitated, then followed. The stranger waited until the shooting stopped, then peered out the window. Silas Blackwood and two of his men were retreating down the alley. They had the deed. The stranger cursed under his breath. He had the real document, but now Silas had the fake one, the one that would be used to legitimize the theft. He needed to get back to Arabella before it was too late. He ran out of the registry office, jumping onto his horse and riding hard toward the edge of town, where Arabella and her children were staying. The trail was growing cold, but he wasn't giving up. Not yet. The stranger spurred his horse harder, the wind whipping his red bandana as he raced toward the edge of town, where Arabella and her children were staying. Every instinct told him he was being followed, but he couldn't afford to stop and check. The fake deed was in Silas's hands now, and time was running out. He turned onto the dusty trail, leading to the small cabin where Arabella had found shelter. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. That's when he heard it, the sound of horses galloping behind him, closing fast. He didn't look back. Instead, he reached for his rifle, keeping one hand on the reins. His horse sensed the danger and picked up speed, but it wasn't enough. 3 riders emerged from the trees, guns drawn. "Blackwood wants that deed," one of them called out. The stranger pulled his horse to a stop just as they surrounded him. He did slowly, keeping his hands in plain sight. "I don't have it," he said, his voice steady despite the situation. "Liar!" the leader spat, leveling his pistol. "Drop your weapons, now!" The stranger hesitated for a split second. These weren't just hired guns. They were Silas Blackwood's most ruthless men. They wouldn't hesitate to kill him and take whatever he had. "Make me!" the stranger said, before diving behind his horse as gunfire erupted. Bullets whizzed past his head, striking the dirt where he'd been standing. He returned fire, hitting one man in the shoulder. The man cried out and fell from his horse. The other 2 pressed their attack, closing in fast. The stranger rolled, coming up with his pistol drawn. He fired twice, hitting one man in the leg. The remaining rider hesitated, then turned his horse and fled. The stranger stood, breathing heavily. He was bleeding from a wound on his arm where a bullet had grazed him. It wasn't serious, but it was bleeding freely. He quickly retrieved his rifle and saddlebag, then mounted his horse. The encounter had cost him precious time, but he couldn't afford to stop. Silas Blackwood now had the fake deed that would legitimize his theft of Arabella's land. The real deed was still safe in his saddlebag, but he needed to get it to Arabella before Silas could use the fake one. As he rode on, the pain in his arm reminded him of what was at stake. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was personal. Silas had threatened a woman and her children, stolen their home, and now he'd tried to kill the stranger. The line had been crossed. The stranger pushed his horse faster, determined to reach Arabella before nightfall. She and her children were counting on him, and he wouldn't let them down. Not now. Not ever. He could see the small cabin up ahead, smoke rising from the chimney. Arabella was there, and with her, the real deed that would prove her ownership of the land. All he had to do was get there before Silas did. Subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The stranger rode toward the small cabin, where Arabella and her children were staying, his arm throbbing with each movement. The blood had soaked through his sleeve, but the wound wasn't deep. Still, it slowed him down, and every second counted. Silas Blackwood had the fake deed now, the one that would legitimize his theft of Arabella's land. As he approached the cabin, he noticed something unusual. A woman was standing near the edge of the property, wringing her hands and looking nervously toward the road. She was dressed in simple homespun clothes, her face pale with fear. The stranger slowed his horse, studying her. She wasn't from around here. He'd never seen her in Deadwood before, and she was watching the road like she expected trouble. "Ma'am!" he called out, his voice raspy from the dust and exertion. The woman jumped, startled by his approach. "Oh, I didn't mean to startle you." "I wasn't startled," the stranger said, dismounting slowly. His arm protested the movement. "I was just curious why you're standing watch out here." The woman glanced nervously toward the cabin. I'm helping Arabella with the children while she tends to her chores." The stranger nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "You seem worried about something." The woman bit her lip, looking down at her worn boots. "It's nothing, really. Just things have been tense since what happened at the ranch." The stranger took a step closer. "I know what happened. I'm trying to help Arabella get her land back." The woman's eyes widened. "You're the man who helped her before? With the deed?" "I am," the stranger said, "and I need your help." The woman shook her head quickly. I can't get involved. Silas Blackwood, he's dangerous. He threatened me if I said anything." "Threatened you?" the stranger asked, his voice low but intense. "What did he say?" The woman looked around nervously before leaning closer. "He said if he heard I was talking to anyone about what I saw, he'd burn down my husband's shop and my home." The stranger studied her face, searching for deception. He found none, only genuine fear. "What did you see?" "It was the night before they came for Arabella," the woman whispered. "I was walking home late and saw Nathaniel Thorne meeting with Silas behind the land registry office. They were talking about papers. Silas had a satchel, and when he opened it, I saw a document. It looked like a deed." The stranger's interest piqued. "What did you see specifically?" "The date," the woman said, her voice barely audible. "The deed was dated 3 years ago, but I know for a fact that the Cavendish family renewed their deed just last year. I saw Arabella's husband signing papers myself." The stranger nodded slowly. "So Silas has a fake deed, one with an older date to make it appear legitimate?" The woman nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I wanted to tell Arabella. I really did. But Silas found out I was watching that day. His men came to my house that night, threatened everything I have." The stranger looked toward the cabin, then back at the woman. "I need you to do something for me." The woman shook her head frantically. "No, I can't. I told you—" "Not now," the stranger said gently. "When this is over. After I've dealt with Silas Blackwood." The woman looked at him, uncertainty in her eyes. "You can't just deal with him. He has men. Lots of them." "I've dealt with men like him before," the stranger said, his voice steady. "And I always win." The woman studied his face, searching for something, anything, that would convince her he could follow through. Finally, she nodded slowly. "What do you want me to do?" "Go to the cabin," the stranger said. "Tell Arabella I'm coming. Tell her to have the children ready to leave if needed, but tell her to trust me." The woman nodded again. "I'll do it, but please, be careful." The stranger watched as the woman hurried toward the cabin, her shoulders slumped with fear. He knew she was taking a risk just by talking to him, but she'd given him something valuable, confirmation that Silas's deed was indeed fake and a way to expose it. As he waited for her to return, the stranger checked his pistol, making sure it was loaded. The wound in his arm throbbed, but he ignored it. Silas Blackwood had made this personal, and the stranger always finished what he started. "Keep watching, because what this man does next is something you won't see coming." The stranger watched as the woman hurried toward the cabin, her shoulders slumped with fear. He knew she was taking a risk just by talking to him, but she'd given him something valuable, confirmation that Silas's deed was indeed fake, and a way to expose it. As he waited for her to return, the stranger checked his pistol, making sure it was loaded. The wound in his arm throbbed, but he ignored it. Silas Blackwood had made this personal, and the stranger always finished what he started. "Keep watching, because what this man does next is something you won't see coming." The woman returned moments later, her face pale but determined. "She's ready. Arabella knows you're coming. She has the children waiting inside." The stranger nodded, mounting his horse. "Tell her to stay put. I'll handle this." He rode toward the Cavendish ranch, the setting sun casting long shadows across the landscape. As he approached, he could see Silas Blackwood and 2 of his men standing outside the main house, pistols drawn. They were waiting for someone or something. "Looking for this," the stranger called out, raising the Bible in his hand. Silas turned, his eyes widening when he saw the stranger. "Where did you get that?" "The real question is," the stranger said, dismounting slowly, "why you thought a fake deed would work." One of Silas's men raised his pistol. "Drop it now, and walk away." The stranger didn't move. "I don't think so." Silas smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You're outnumbered, stranger. 3 guns to 1. Walk away while you still can." The stranger shook his head. "I don't walk away from bullies, especially not ones who pick on women and children." Silas's face darkened. "You've interfered with my business for the last time." "Your business is theft," the stranger said, opening the Bible, "and it's over." As he revealed the real deed inside, Silas's men exchanged nervous glances. The stranger had them. He had proof that Silas's claim was fraudulent. "Shoot him!" Silas yelled, raising his own pistol. The stranger didn't flinch. He'd been expecting this. His hand moved faster than theirs, his pistol drawn and aimed before they could fire. "Not today," he said, his voice cold as steel. "Not ever. Subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?" The stranger's pistol remained steady, aimed at Silas Blackwood's chest. Silas's 2 men hesitated, their hands near their weapons, but not drawing them yet. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ranch yard. "You think that paper means anything?" Silas sneered, trying to maintain his tough demeanor despite the situation. "I have the official documents, signed by the registrar himself." "The registrar who was paid to forge a fake," the stranger said calmly. He opened the Bible again, revealing the real deed. "This one has the original signatures, the one from when Arabella's grandfather first claimed this land." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Where did you get that?" "It was hidden in plain sight," the stranger said, "inside the family Bible, the one Arabella's son carried with him when they were forced out." A commotion at the edge of the property caught everyone's attention. Arabella stood there, Thomas and Eleanor beside her, watching the scene unfold. She had a determined look on her face, but the fear in her eyes was still visible. "Arabella!" Silas called out, trying to regain control of the situation. "You see, this stranger is trying to steal what's rightfully mine." Arabella shook her head. "It's my land, Silas. My family's land. You stole it through lies and threats." The stranger turned slightly toward her. "The deed is yours, ma'am. All you have to do is claim it." As if on cue, Nathaniel Thorne appeared at the edge of the property, looking nervous. I can authenticate that," he said, pointing to the deed in the stranger's hand. "It's the original, the one I filed years ago." Edmund Ashworth rode up behind him, his face pale with anger. "You'll pay for this, Thorne." The stranger turned his pistol toward Ashworth. "You'll be paying for everything. Attempted theft, conspiracy, bribery of a public official?" Ashworth's face paled further. "You can't prove anything." "I don't need to," the stranger said. "The deed speaks for itself, and so does the registrar's testimony." Silas Blackwood cursed under his breath. "This isn't over." "It is over," the stranger said. "You have until sundown to leave this property, permanently." Silas hesitated, then nodded to his men. They backed away slowly, holstering their weapons. Silas shot one last glare at Arabella, then turned and rode away, his men following behind him. Nathaniel Thorne looked at Arabella. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was paid well. I thought I could get away with it." Arabella nodded. "The law will decide what happens to you." Thorne nodded, then walked away with his shoulders slumped. Edmund Ashworth spat on the ground. "You haven't heard the last of me." The stranger didn't respond. He simply holstered his pistol and walked toward Arabella and her children. "It's yours," he said, handing her the Bible with the deed inside. "The land, the house, everything." Arabella took it, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. I don't know how to ever repay you." "You don't have to," the stranger said. "Just take care of your family." He turned and walked back to his horse, not waiting for thanks or praise. He mounted the dark brown horse and rode west, disappearing into the sunset as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.